So hello, everyone. I think we will get started and people can join in as the conversation continues. My name is Dakota Schultz. I'm the Executive Director of the Chicago chapter of ANA. I was thinking about this opening this morning, and it occurred to me that probably like a lot of us, we're a year into this pandemic. And so what that means for the chapter here is that this is our 12th webinar now. We had events scheduled, in-person events, if we remember those, back in March last year that we had to cancel, and we quickly moved everything to this online webinar format. And honestly, I still struggle after a year with the term webinar. I struggle with a lot of things in this last year, but the term webinar, sticks out at me. I think that it's very diminutive for what we're trying to do, and that these kind of events, these meetings really are gatherings of our peers and a sharing of a community. And that just webinar doesn't sum it up for me just in the right way, because this is a community, and that's what we're doing. And in that regards, I wanted to thank some people right at the top, and really don't do this often enough. So excuse the list reading, but as most of you know, the chapter of ANA Business Marketing here in Chicago is completely volunteer run. And so these events come together with these people, and that's Tony Kempa, Alon Lopez, Betsy Fiden, Philip Bridge, Philip Black, Suzanne Martin, Julia Porshkova, Roland Jacobs, Lisa Smith, Andrew Miller, Brian Krause, and Janine Gaffke. So thank you to all of them for helping to put this together. But it goes beyond that. I think I've thanked all of you for joining us each time we do one of these, and I mean that perhaps particularly so for this event. There's different ways to get involved, and that can include making suggestions for topics or speakers that we can host, sharing ideas, helping to promote and encourage your own networks to attend these events. But honestly, the biggest thanks is just for showing up, because I think that we are sharing really matters as much sometimes as what we are sharing. And to me, that goes to the heart of today's topic, which is inclusivity in broad strokes. And when we adjusted how we were planning these types of events in the last year, the general theme was marketers leading through change, which was obviously a very relevant topic. And it was rooted first in the pandemic, but then frankly, there was the murder of George Floyd, and it was something that I didn't think that we could go forward with without recognizing. So here we are now giving even more attention to something that is a cause for change. And sometimes those changes happen very suddenly, but sometimes very gradually, especially with cultural change, which I know we're going to talk a lot about today. There's a quote from the esteemed John Lewis that has always stuck with me, that if you can imagine a better world, you can create it. And really, so you should live as if. And it's something that I try to lead in business with, and certainly lead in life with. And John Lewis said something else that I'm sure a lot of people have heard, that if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And I don't think that Congressman Lewis was talking about B2B marketers, but you know what? Why not, right? Because we're here and we've got talent. Someone that I know that has probably answered that question in the affirmative is Philip Black. So I'm going to turn it over to Philip here to get us going. He's a fellow board member. As I said, he's a senior vice president of strategy at Gyro. He's led strategy for very well-known B2B brands, Accenture, Grainger, Grant Thornton, Vanguard, and more. He's a very action-oriented advocate of diversity and inclusion. I know him to be someone who is very considerate, very compassionate, thoughtful, and empathetic. Glad to have him as a friend and a colleague. And with that, Philip, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dakota. That is a tough act to follow. And thank you everyone for joining us. We know that this is an important conversation, and it's a difficult one. And so we're going to embrace all sides. We hope that this will be a day and a moment where we can be really vulnerable with one another and very open. So in the spirit of that, I'm going to keep my video on, even through any awkward moments that come up. I encourage you to do the same if you're comfortable with that. But let's just lay the context. I think Dakota did a great job of centering us what's going on in culture, in society, and why this should matter for all of us. We know that marketers are charged with signaling where the direction of travel is for organizations. So whether that's a leadership vision around CSR, sustainability, employee engagement, and of course, today's topic, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Marketers are often handed these topics and they may or may not be experts in these areas. So we're looking to engage on this level with this community of marketers and special guests and experts in the matter. So we know that companies are prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just because of the murder of George Floyd. It shouldn't just be a moment, but going back to 2015, Harvard Business Review cited that 76% of senior executives believe that a more diverse workforce improves the organization's financial performance, which begs, of course, a whole lot of questions why we haven't seen as much progress since 2015. But we also know that there's an influx of millennials within the workforce and within buying committees today. That's not a new topic, but today we know that it's about 73% of buying committees of buyers represent millennials. And we know that millennials want to buy from companies that represent and reflect their values. And they are increasingly caring about things that perhaps haven't had the spotlight before, including creating a diverse and inclusive culture and workplace society that we are discussing today. So we see a lot of business leaders that are in the spotlight talking about things that frankly, they haven't been prepared to speak about. We see that in the vacuum of what I would call sensible governmental leadership, we've seen a lot of business leaders actually stepping forward. So they're ill-equipped in many instances to talk about some of these things. So this is why this conversation is so important, not just to us as people, but to us as marketers. And suffice it to say, I mentioned right up front, we want this to be a safe space to the degree that that's possible. Missteps happen all the time, even for allies. And I would consider myself an ally, not just because this is something that I care about and believe to be right, but because I'm a father of a Black daughter. And yet, even in planning with Dr. Green and with Jeffrey, we were in the planning process. I was looking at a document. My opening statement, ladies and gentlemen, was, okay, we have some content here. Here are some thoughts, but let's not view this as a set of handcuffs. And it was like, the opening comment, that I would say something like that. And actually at the close of the conversation, to Jeff and Dr. Green's credit, they were very gracious. I brought it up. I'm like, hey, I'm just gonna call that out. That was kind of an awkward moment and I'm sorry about that. And they were very gracious about that. So I share that to say, look, we're all human beings. We are all learning. And even the best intentioned of us, we're likely to kind of slip. And it's important for us to keep, kind of learning and growing together. So that was a long introduction. Let me introduce our special guest, Dr. Maurice Green. He's up on my upper left over here. He is the founder of the Black Doctoral Network, which is a network that connects corporations that are serious about diversity and inclusion to a national network of Black and Latinx PhD scholars and experts in a variety of subject areas. These subject areas are cutting edge expertise in a variety of topics that Dr. Green will share about. It includes collaboration, resource sharing. The Black Doctoral Network engages with boardroom and C-suite individuals to bring greater cultural awareness and diversity through its community of thought leaders. And just underneath me here, I have Jeff Beckham. He is the interim CEO of Chicago Scholars. Not only is Jeff well known within the tech community in Chicago, having piloted and been a part of several successful startups and organizations, he is now at the helm of Chicago Scholars. Chicago Scholars partners with dozens of the city's leading corporations to create mutually beneficial talent development opportunities. These opportunities accelerate the leadership potential for minority scholars and drive growth for the business community at large. All right, with no further ado, let's get right into things. First off, Dr. Green, Jeffrey, would you tell us a little bit about your organizations? What are you looking to impact and how?
Sure. First, thank you all for having me. And thank you, Dakota and ANA, for your continued partnership. I think we worked on quite a few things together. ANA was very instrumental in helping us build out our leadership curriculum. We did an event about a year and a half ago where leaders took part in some improv. And so you all have been instrumental in helping us do that. And that's what we do. Chicago Scholars builds future leaders in our city. We believe that your zip code shouldn't determine your life's outcome. Our students who are all first generation college going or from low income cities of Chicago start with us at the end of their junior year of high school. And for the period of 7 years, we work with them on leadership development, career exploration, career planning, and eventually getting them into their careers to become leaders inside of the city. And so for the last 25 years, we've done that relatively well. When you look at the outcome measures of the student population we work with, on average, about 40% will graduate from college at Chicago Scholars. 83% of our students graduate. And so, we've seen students achieve things like go on to become, fellows that are currently sailing the coast of the Atlantic Ocean with National Geographic. And one of our scholars actually just got a recent $5 million grant working on sustainable ocean work. And locally in Chicago, individuals like Sierra Boatwright and Nicole Johnson, who are Forbes 20 in their 20s and Crane's 40 under 40 are really leading change in the city. And that's what we do. We hope to be the future people you all market to, the future business owners you work with to help build marketing strategies. And, again, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. In the other world, as Philip mentioned, I served as National Director of Digital Marketing for New Teacher Center and ran a digital marketing agency for 10 years before kind of getting into this work because I saw gaps in diversity, whether it was content marketing world or Dreamforce or whatever conference I was at. I noticed that it was a gap in terms of the number of people of color that were there. And so my goal was to go do the work to connect them to opportunities and jobs and get them through school so that they're prepared to be successful in the marketplace. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so very much. Again, that's a tough act to follow, my brother Jeff. And also, just before I start, just very special thanks to Dakota and Philip and ANA for allowing us this opportunity to be able to speak and share our experiences. So the Black Doctoral Network is an organization that I founded about 10 years ago. I started the organization because I ended up being one Black doctoral student in one discipline. And I realized and became aware of the fact that that was not a unique experience. So the Black Doctoral Network was started just as a network of Black and Latino scholars that would just get together for the purpose of getting a drink and being able to kind of share our experiences, and particularly operating in historically white institutions. We all had this similar trail that we were on. So it started with about 50 Black and Latino students, and now has grown to an organization that has 34,000 Black and Latino PhD students in just about every possible discipline in universities throughout the country. Everything from artificial intelligence, linguistic anthropologists, nuclear physicists. We have a unique experience that we've kind of built into the network because of the siloing of the university systems. And the purpose of the Black Doctoral Network is, first of all, to be able to create safe spaces for academicians, not only PhD holders, but master's level students. And we've even opened up the organization to undergrads to create a pipeline that allows for those that are interested in pursuing careers in the academy, and whether it's university systems or their MD, JD, PsyD, helping them to have a space where they can share, where they can connect. And again, it's just been a work of love. The Black Doctoral Network also provides resources to university systems, corporations, nonprofits for board members, if you're interested in creating a diverse board. So we have this wealth of intellectual capital, skill sets, and accomplishments to share with individuals that are interested in sharing or utilizing our intellectual capital, so to speak. Also, And I think this is one of the key components. It's about giving back to the community. What the network does is we also volunteer our time and effort to government organizations to help them with some of the pressing issues. And I think one of the unique perspectives of the network is the interconnection of different disciplines, right? So that we take a more holistic approach to attacking some of the most pressing issues that we face as a country. So I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to share. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation, because the truth be told, it's a conversation that's generally not had, right? We generally don't get into the mud to really discuss the type of things that we need to discuss beyond just the numbers, whether you have X amount of Black and Latino or Asian people. We need to get into the culture of organizations and companies so that we can really start to heal in ways that obviously we really need to. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Green. Mr. Beckham. So speaking of conversation, we want this to be two-way. We know this is a bit of an, this is an unconventional setup, conventional now for us, but we want to hear first from everyone. So I'm going to put through a live poll. I'm going to be sharing my screen. What we'd like you to just think about is, within your organization, what one word best represents your opportunity for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I will share my desktop. Here we go. All right. So you should see this live poll up on screen. Perfect. There's a couple of responses already. Go ahead and let's take a minute and pop in your responses here. So you can respond either by text, as you see at the top for old school, or the URL that we placed there. All right, I think that's really helpful to see how this is kind of shaping the group here. Feel free to keep going with your responses. I think that helps us get a sense, kind of a pulse check, if you will, of where we are at. Oops, sorry, I think we lost my screen. Let me go back. There we go. Oops. There we go. Apologies. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Mr. Beckham, let's start with you. We talked a bit at the outset why this topic is important, but we just love to hear from you. Why are we talking about this? Why is this important to marketers today, from your perspective?
Well, I'll start, Philip, by sharing a story, and then I think perhaps it'll be even more relevant. I again mentioned that I worked in marketing for a while, and in the last couple of years, taking up art. Right, so I started a habit. I paint, have an online art gallery, a gallery over in the Bridgeport neighborhood in Chicago, and I decided that I wanted to start producing products, marketing my products online, and so I have a piece that is relatively popular, and the piece is of Ruby Bridges, an image of her when she's walking into the school in Louisiana. And next to the image of Ruby, I painted the word Queen. In the original piece by Norman Rockwell, it has the N word next to her. And so I wanted to kind of reimagine that. Well, I noticed that, trending data was telling me that people were buying the piece, especially in Canada, Toronto, and Montreal. And I got an interesting message from a young lady in Montreal, a woman of color, who asked me, could I reproduce the piece without the word Queen on it? Well, I didn't know that there was some historical context and some pain behind the word Queen with some of the monarchy and rule in Canada, historic pain. Well, when I ran the ad, I did so at the jest of an online automated system called Kit Carts that just ran it and said, oh, you should run this in Canada because you have you're trending there. And I think this speaks to even a person of color who has assumed that this would be completely fine. My intention was well intended as I'm publishing the piece. And I think, again, like, it happens. The first thing that I said was I apologize. And now, as I started to do targeting for Canada, I actually have the piece without that word there, understanding the context. And I think when we ask why does it matter, it matters to the audience, the people that we're working with, the companies that we're working with, the businesses we market to. There is so much historical hurt with regard to racial injustice and insensitivity in our country that, to not acknowledge that is a failed opportunity to really create a space for healing. We hear and have heard continuously from our scholars who are college students going on to work in the workplace that they really struggle with culture when they walk into the doors of organizations. And I think you mentioned, Philip, millennials are slightly different than zennials as well, where they're walking away from jobs and opportunities. And so what we see is a gap, a talent gap for opportunities, and they're walking away from purchasing these brands that don't respect and value the identity that they bring into the rooms that they're in. And I think that if we want to continue to think about this, first, let's be on the right side of history. Let's do the right thing by people. Let's practice, equity as a just a core tenet of what it means to be a good human. And I think part of like the core tenet of what I hope that the Bill of Rights and our Constitution was trying to build at the time for all people. But beyond that too, it's a business case too that's necessary to understand and practice as well. I've heard many business leaders in the city say we're trying to win the race for talent. Well, if you do, you need to have a culture that's inviting and welcoming and inclusive for folks that may not be the typical individuals that you've had on your staff from past and previous years. So just a few thoughts there.
Well said. Dr. Green?
Again, having to follow intellectual brilliance is just difficult, but I'm going to do the best I can. Okay, so I think obviously I agree that we are at an inflection point, so to speak. I think we are at a point in our history where, particularly with our millennial generation, that it's a social media juggernaut that's actually informing the way people think, move, live, and experience their lives, so to speak. And I think what we're looking at is the difference between what you might call personality versus character, or brand versus identity. People are very concerned at this point, much more about who you really are as opposed to who you purport to be. And I think that this is something that organizations and companies are starting to realize, that you just can't put out great content or great advertising, and then you try to shape it in a way that you speak the language of the people and think that that's going to be enough to pacify the individuals that are hurting day to day in their lived experience. One of the things that I like to point out, I was trying to remember what movie this was, but it was a Western where I don't know if it was Clint Eastwood or John Wayne, but he was a cowboy, right? And in essence, he came across some, I guess I think they were Mexican. And so this white individual, who's the star of the show, decides to speak to these people in their own language, right? So, he starts speaking Spanish, and their response to him in that movie was, "We're not little children to be impressed because you speak our language." And I think that's a really important point for us to really dive into, right? That this is not just a matter of corporations looking like or sounding like they understand the problem, but we need people to really start looking at, like our brother Jeff said, the culture, right? Because for a lot of people, again, it's a numbers game, right? We can tell that we have X amount of Black employees, X amount of people on the board, right? But it's not just about the numbers. It's about whether your culture is a welcoming environment to attract the type of people that you're suggesting that you want. If you're really committed to this diversity and inclusion, what you really have to look at is why to this point it hasn't happened, right? So how long have corporations been talking about diversity and inclusion? How long has this dialogue been taking place? How long have we, the top companies, right, or the top educators or the top minds been brought in from the top business schools and the top consulting firms to deal with this diversity and inclusion challenge, right? And I air quote challenge because we hear so often that we just can't find the type of talent that the Black talent or the Latinx talent, where in the Black Doctoral Network, we have like 34,000 Black and Latino highly credentialed, a pool of talent that any company could pull from. So we have to really wonder why and start to explore why the cultures that exist at these corporations hasn't facilitated the type of diversity and inclusion that everyone seems to be talking about. So I think we're at the point where people have got to really look at whether it's just about their brand, as in what they put out, or their true identity, which is the culture that exists in these organizations that to this point has failed miserably in this diversity and inclusion space.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. We're going to transition over to, as I mentioned up front, there are awkward moments that happen all the time, and this is a space, safe space. A lot of the important dialogue around diversity, equity, and inclusion is unspoken. So let's talk about some of the unspoken. What I'd love to hear is from both of your perspectives, what are some awkward questions or unspoken questions that have come forward from people that you think would be helpful for us to discuss here today? And as we're listening, for everyone here, be thinking about that as well. What are some of the questions, for everyone here that you just love to ask, but it would be a bit awkward to do so? So let's go ahead and, Dr. Green, let's start with you again on this one.
So one of the questions that was posed to us from one of the companies that we are still working with was, why is it necessary? And I know that sounds ridiculous, but they're coming from the position that this is kind of like a charitable exercise, right? So they operate under the misnomer that they have already done their due diligence in trying to find the top talent. And it just so happens that Blacks and Latinos are not applying, or they don't have the credentials. So getting individuals from the point where they're actually thinking that this is just a charitable exercise, kind of like an affirmative action movement, is something that was put to us, and obviously we had to take the time to explain to them that if you're talking about talent pool, right, it's almost like, and I like to use this example when they talk about hyper incarceration, which is really important to the Black community, right? And one of the positionalities that they take is, well, there are more Black people in prison, hence more Black people are committing crimes, hence the problem is with criminality in the Black community. So that's the line of thinking, right? And they fail to think about the fact that officers are doing their job, right? But they're doing their jobs in very specific communities, right? They're cracking down on drugs in very specific communities. Whereas, in New York and Harlem, they're arresting a lot of Blacks and Latinos using drugs, but they're not touching, right, Columbia University's campus, right? So there's the enforcement component, right? So that's something that they don't look at. And so what we tried to help them understand is the fact that you're casting a net, right? But you're not casting a net that's inclusive, right? And you're not, it's an opportunity gap, not a skill set gap, and not a talent gap. So I think one of the more interesting questions that we received was, why is it necessary? It feels like affirmative action, and getting them to understand that, if you're pulling only older white men into your organization, then it's not about the lack of talent. It's a deficit in your ability to broaden your scope to get the best of the best, which obviously would include a more diverse body of employees and team members.
Yeah, well said. Jeffrey, let's go to you, sir.
Yeah, I think the question that comes up often, whether it's spoken or unspoken, is how do I become an ally, right? And how do I perform ally and move from beyond performative allyship? And I think this question is, one that I get often at Chicago Scholars when we talk to our corporate partners, and they come with the intention of wanting to help be part of the solution. And I appreciate that. I always kind of point back to, there's a really good book and set of doctrine by Glenn Campbell, Courageous Conversations on Race. And they speak to 4 quadrants that, in particular, our white allies will respond with: the moral, the intellectual, the relational, and emotional quadrants. And all of those lead to different things. Some moral starts to believe to, the belief change, the intellectual starts to get you in your head to think about like the actions and activities, the relational moves you to act, right? And finally, the emotional causes some feelings and usually can lead to guilt. What Doctor speaks to is, centering yourself and being centered in that so that you can, perform or move towards the actual work of allyship in the center. And I think one of the things that we have to do is begin to help center ourselves. But beyond that, there are some very tangible things you can do, starting with learning. I think one of the things that we're doing at Chicago Scholars is starting from ground zero, assuming that even if you're a person of color or you come from a diverse community or background, very limited amount about what you know for yourself. And so we start with conversations about our own identity, who we are, our belief system, and we start in grounding that there. From there, we began to, identify and define what these words really mean: diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and racial justice. After that, we worked together to craft a statement. And the statement speaks to what our organization believes with regards to this as well, leading into a work plan with actual measures. And I think, in the beginning, just to start, you start by learning. There's some great books. I've been suggesting these to many friends and people around the way. We can send you a list, I'm sure, on how to begin, and then diving into conversations, having direct conversations with folks that are in your network that you are close to talk to people, to understand where the challenges have been, what has happened, how have they felt with regard to this past summer with the racial injustice that happened after George Floyd's murder. I mean, they're very finite in things you can do to kind of start. And then from there, again, I always say give yourself space and grace, because we're all learning. I shared recently that, for me, growing up in a Southern Baptist Christian household with two very strict parents, there were things that I was told with regard to the LGBTQ community that, just weren't accurate. They weren't true. They weren't honest. They weren't done and I've come along, and done my own, homework and self-reflection and journey in that space. And as I've done that, I've brought family members with me in that space. And I think that's stage two: the people that you have influence over, the sphere of influence that you can connect with those folks and bring them along in the work too, as well. That's where you can, begin.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So hopefully we've been kind of just thinking about some of the questions that might be awkward, to ask. What I'm going to do is open up the live poll once again, and this is an opportunity to do so. So you don't need to give your name or anything of that nature if you don't want to, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And again, that same exact link. So if you have that in a browser, you'll notice that the question in that browser will have changed. I'll share my screen here in just a moment. Perfect. So we'll take a moment here to look at some of this.
I do think we all know the answer to why Dr. Green is looking so good.
Okay.
I wasn't gonna say it, Dakota.
Right.
I was just gonna laugh through
Dakota,
it.
So I was gonna act like, someone from the audience just felt like asking that question and not it's something that we did as a test earlier. So
right.
I'll just sit there and say, oh, thank you. Someone from the audience.
So Dr. Green, Jeff, you can take these questions however you'd like. I think we're getting some good questions here. So the first one that we see here is, why is there an aversion from corporations to share detailed ethnic representation data publicly?
Oh,
Philip, just so you know, I don't think we can see these questions.
right, not yet.
Oh, okay.
We're stuck on the screen.
Sorry, guys. Zoom is a little persnickety, so I'm just going to share my whole screen, which means you're probably going to get repeated video stuff here. All right, come on. Okay, give it just a moment. Here we go. So after we get past some of these here.
Okay. I can start.
Yeah, so the question was, why is there an aversion to share detailed ethnic representation data?
Okay, well, that's, I mean, because that would be truth, right? That is what is needed to get to a place of equity and have a diverse population of experts and employees, team members, right? And it reveals where you actually are. And, you know, it's a matter of being able to tell the truth, right? And to be honest and open in reference to your inability as an organization or corporation to fulfill the goals that you may have said publicly, right? So it's not uncommon for corporations to put on a statement regarding diversity and inclusion, and it usually is worded that it's a part of the DNA of our organization. And if you hold that statement up to the actual numbers, right, you see the hypocrisy, or at least what people would think is being disingenuous, right? And so then that goes back to the difference between brand and identity, right? People start to see whether you are living the mantra, the mission statements that you suggest are a part of your, are core or foundational to who your company is. So I think that I think is the clearest, at least for me. It's going to tell the truth that you're saying one thing, but your results reflect something completely different.
That's good.
Yeah, just to tack on there really quickly, because I know we got a lot of questions there. You know, it's the same reason why people on Instagram, you know, show the best parts of their vacation, right? You don't see all the stuff that happened, the kids going crazy in the background, you know, the roller coaster rides you had to stay on for 45 minutes just to wait in line to get on. They show the family picture with all the kids happy and smiling in front of the Disney World castle, right? It's the ability to show the shiny parts. And I think companies, you know, transparency can be hard, especially when it reveals something that's not so nice. And I think that a lot of companies have struggled with that. We've been trying to do that data digging at Chicago Scholars, trying to figure out what companies are actually practicing this so that we can build a list of firms to partner with regard to our scholars. You know, we have 4,000 kids that we're putting into organizations throughout the city of Chicago. And so how do you find that? You know, companies are very hesitant, even when we ask them, you know, to sign agreements where we won't share the data publicly. Will you share it with us just in jest? We've gotten a lot of no's to that because of the fear of what may be uncovered if you show truth.
I'd like to also make a statement real quickly because I know we're running short on time, but there was a question that passed by the screen that I think needs to be answered immediately. And it said something to the effect that I'm in an all-white company and I'm going to hire my first Black employee. I guess what conversation?
Sorry, I'm trying to get this
no,
thing
it's okay.
to kind of.
What conversation do you have with your
Yeah.
workforce? I would say, I think that needs to be addressed immediately, at least from my perspective, absolutely none. Right? I don't think that a conversation, like if you're bringing on an employee that's Black, there shouldn't be a conversation about the Black employee or the employee that's Black, because inadvertently you're setting up a divisive kind of culture where there is a difference that we're going to talk about. Now, there are other conversations that you need to have, but setting up a framework where a person is coming into an organization, say it's me, Dr. Green, coming to your organization, and you've talked to all of your employees about the Black man that's coming in, you're prejudicing my experience and their what they would learn or become or be, or what can happen organically by just adding diverse talent. So I wouldn't want you to prejudice the experience of the individual or the employees. I think conversations can happen subsequently, but I think if you have to take your staff aside and say, hey, we have a Black woman coming in, you already have problems in your organization that you might want to work on before you bring the Black employee in. So I thought that was just important to share because
Very good. Well, honestly, I know that we wanted a conversation. We're getting one, and we're getting these awkward questions. So let's keep going. I'm going to just start from the bottom, and so we've got, what am I And Jeffrey and Dr. Green, as I scroll through, if there are ones you want to riff on or respond to, we've got 15 minutes together. So I think we can use the time to dig into some of these and make sure that we have just a couple minutes at the end, you know, for us to just have open dialogue as well.
Jeff, can I jump into the fear question? What is the fear?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right, that's really important. The fear is that we've been told in this this American experiment that it is a meritocracy, right? So people think that they are in the places that they are in simply because they are talented, they are gifted, and they are the best of the best. That's why they're here, right? So to open up the conversation about the ways in which people may have gotten into positions, and there was white privilege, favoritism, and things of that nature that they may not even see. They may not really know because they just did the best job they could. You know, to the fear is possibly realizing that you are privileged in ways that you may not be aware of, and subsequently now you have an obligation in knowing to try to do something about it. So I think that's the fear. People realizing that maybe they're not the special person that they thought they were, and that there are privileges, there's systemic privileges that afford them opportunities that other people haven't gotten. So I think being able to look at yourself and say, wait, maybe I got here as a white man, and maybe it wasn't just simply because I was good. So I think that's what, and that cuts to the identity question. So that's all I want to say on that.
Good.
Philip, if I could add something to that too, just because Jeff, you said something about this earlier that actually really caught my attention in terms of businesses looking for the race for talent, right? And I had seen this video a long time ago, and now I'm thinking about it in a different way from a business standpoint, but it goes to exactly what Dr. Green was talking about, that it was a bunch of young people who were all lined up, right? It was like an outdoor kind of exercise. And the question that was, you know, the challenge that was put to them was, hey, there's $1,000 at the end of the yard here, right? Whoever can race and get there first is going to get $1,000. And you can see all of these, you know, young people, men, women, really excited, like, I got this, this money's going to be mine, right? And right before the person's about to kick off the race, he says, okay, but first, if you grew up in a 2-parent household, take 10 steps forward, right? And if you grew up in the suburbs, take another 10 steps forward. And you can see everyone's like, wait, this isn't exactly fair, right? And it gets into, if you're white, take another 10 steps forward. If you're a man, take another 10 steps forward. And it's revealing in that way in terms of what Dr. Green was just saying of, you know, what's the privilege that I have that I may not be aware of. But to frame it the way Jeff talked about as a business, how are you resetting the parameters of the race so that the true talent is going to end up at that finish line for you and get into your group and, you know, be successful for you? I just thought of that in terms of this conversation today. I think it's spot on.
Yeah, well said, Dakota. We actually use that video and unpack that with our career partners in our internship program. And we go a little bit deeper because one of the things that I think that video, while it's powerful, it fails to unpack is that there are many young people of color and a lot of our talent that have privileges that are innate to them too as well, that are often not seen or not seen as a privilege. You know, we talk about our students as Chicago scholars. If you're working full-time and taking care of your brother and sister, but you got a 3.7 GPA, you're ultimately very talented and doing many things right and practicing leadership competencies and skills that aren't directly attributed to leadership in corporate America. And so one of the things we've really worked to do is sit our corporations, our corporate partners down and say, look, what would, if a kid had an organization, if you had a person that had, you know, skills at organizing, can manage things really well, can manage budget and finances, and are also leading in 4 things that are in their, you know, frame of reference in their leadership roles, what kind of individual would this be at your company? And so we actually played a game where we'd have, you know, there were titles and there were the competencies, and the senior leaders mapped the titles to competencies. And you would see like, yeah, senior director, VP, head of marketing, head of, you know, and it was interesting. So then we would turn over like who the kid was. right? And it was like this look of amazement. And one of the senior leaders actually was very honest, and he said, I know there's Black and brown talent in my organization. I just don't know how to communicate with them. And we said, this is the safe space to do this, because what we wanted to do, the goal of that, it was called the Race for Talent. The event we did was to connect our senior leaders at these organizations and firms with diversity and equity practitioners who could help with some of this, help build out, and let them hear from other organizations who were doing it really well as well about what were some of the tactics that they implemented in their organization. But to your point, Dakota, we unpacked that. So we wanted them to see the skills and the superpowers that our young people brought to the table. And I'm sure that they're interacting with more young talent and young people of color in their organizations who have, if not those, more talent and ability than that.
That's great. So apologies because these questions keep cycling, but there was one that I had up just a moment ago around brand and assimilation. Let's see if that comes up again. But while we're waiting on that, Jeff or Dr. Green, were there specific questions in here that you've seen on screen that you'd like to also further dial into?
There's a ton of good ones.
Yeah,
there are.
I know.
There are. Do I know criticism at my job is not because of race?
Here we go. This is the question. And I just wanted to get, of course, it's going to go off screen. Let's see if I can bring that back. I think it was around, well,
Simulation.
Yes. I don't know if you remember enough of it to respond to it, but I think it would be interesting for this group of marketers to hear about that particular piece.
I didn't see the question.
Yeah, it's long.
Okay. Let's do this. I'm going to let that cycle through. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and let's talk about. We've got about 8 minutes together, so let's just talk about what would one or two things that a marketer. What are one or two things that a marketer could do today or start doing today from your perspectives? If we had a group of marketers that are allies, that are interested, that want to see change within their organizations, what one or two things would you encourage them to do?
Okay. Well, off bat, as a marketer, I started practicing the human-centered design as a baseline tenet in anything that we were creating or doing. Going and speaking with the stakeholders who we were actually trying to communicate to through our marketing practices about what demoing, previewing, bringing thought and ideas to the table from them, right? And so if you're not familiar with some of the design thinking concept, I would encourage you to bring in some of that thought process into your work, because oftentimes you'll find when you ask the people that you're building for or the firms you're building for, you'll get great insight and context on either A, this is going to work, or it will not. We did that recently where we were building a scholar portal, a mobile application. And, we sat down with our students, our volunteers, our corporate partners to ask, is this something that they would use? Thankfully, we found out it was, but the investment was, a six-figure investment for a small nonprofit. That's quite a bit of money. And so, we did the due diligence, and we were able to then adjust a little bit because there were aspects of the product that we were developing that would not have worked as well for our student population, recognizing that, something that's desktop first doesn't work for students who will largely use their cell phones first. Mobile was really important, and having something that was code locked in the App Store and not built where it was, a mobile, desktop first, mobile responsive product would not have worked for our students. And so just thinking those things through ahead of time, but it required, getting insight and being inclusive of the stakeholders we were working with in the space to get the information we needed.
Okay, so I would be remiss if I didn't represent where I'm from, so to speak. I could pull quotes from a lot of places, but I want to quote from the great scholar Little Kim. It'll help set the room straight. In one of her songs, this is the lyric, right? Now let me give you a walkthrough, show you what to do and don't do. where it's not safe to go to, when them boys approach you, better say quick who you close to. Why is this relevant, right? The fact is, you know, she's suggesting in Brooklyn, it's very dangerous, right? So if you're going to walk through Brooklyn and you don't know anybody, or if you're approached, you should let them know right away, oh, my cousin lives up the block, right? Why is that relevant? Because these are dangerous times, very precarious, like just in terms of it's very easy to get canceled, right? A misstep can cost you your business, can cost you millions, right? Can cost you your job. That's why it's really important to make sure you have people that you're close to, people that understand the terrain better. So one of the things that I would recommend is that individuals get people on board that are from different places. And this is not necessarily whether I mean, obviously we want you to hire people diverse, but you need to have what Philip and Jeff and Dakota and I refer to as your Black friend, right? You need to have that individual that can help you avoid those missteps before you make them, right? A point of reference, like before you put out this piece of content, before you have this conversation, to have that Black friend that you can talk to and say, before I say this, does this make sense? Is this offensive? So the ability to be able to say who you're close to also corresponds with what organizations you're tied to, which is an indication of the direction that you are either going in or where you are, right? You need to be able to say who you're close to. So you need to partner with organizations that can help inform the way you think, move, and conduct your business. So if you don't know it yourself, because one of the questions that pops up often is, well, I don't know what to do. That's great. You need to bring someone on board that knows what to do, or at least can help inform the way you think or you might move in a particular area. So shout out to Lil Kim for her deep and profound commentary.
I expect there to be a doctorate in Little Kim now, right? Well, thank you. That analogy was awesome and I think very helpful. I know we've got just 3 minutes to go here. One quick question for both of you, and then I'd just like to open up for any just kind of wild card questions from the crowd, either via text or voice. If people want to engage further with either one of you two, how do they do that?
Dr. Green, you got to take the floor first.
Okay,
my MC friend.
Okay, so obviously what I'd much rather you individuals get in touch with the Black Doctoral Network. We're talking about 34,000 Black and Latino intellectuals in every possible discipline. If you're looking for a talent pool, not just to hire, but for consultants or someone to help you really look at what your culture is at this point and how to move to the next step, reach out to the Black Doctoral Network. If you're looking, and that also will help you in having discussions with your higher ups, things that you can't say, the network can bring to them, and we can present it in a way that we can't get fired. And that's something that we didn't cover, that we were hoping to cover in this conversation, because people are also concerned about their jobs. Like, how far can we push the envelope before I'm outed? So what you need is an ally, a friend, and the Black Doctoral Network is that place. Now, myself personally, drgreenspeaks.com. I think all of my social media handles are Dr. Green Speaks. And I just want to say thank you so very much for your time, patience, indulgence. This was a great opportunity, and I just wanted to thank you both and all of you for sitting through it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Chicago
Scholars, chicagoscholars.org. You can find us there. We have, like I mentioned, 4,000 young people, 1,000 plus alumni who are up to 40 years old, working across the country. Our students come from all 77 neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. They go to 115 plus high schools and 200 plus colleges. And we're graduating 400 to 500 young 3.0 or better, very strong candidates every single year. And so that organization is growing. If you want to connect with me, all of my social media is usually my name, Jeffery Beckham, on LinkedIn, Instagram, Jeff Beckham, and I'm more than happy to work with you, connect you to our scholars, our talent, and other organizations like ours in the city. I want to be very clear, we're not doing this alone. There's Braven, Academy Group, One Goal, Posse, Bottom Line, like some amazing organizations working with some excellent talent, some of which have national footprint. So again, and a lot of these individuals are starting companies too as well. I want to be clear about that. So they are future B2B partners of yours. And I can push and point you in that direction too as well. So thank you, ANA, again, for all you do and continue to do to be a good partner And Philip, thank you for hosting this. Dr. Green, it was my pleasure to share the stage with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. And everyone in the room, please don't let this be the end. Send these questions that you have to us, to Philip Black, to Dakota. Yeah. My email is green, just like the color, at blackphdnetwork.com. I really wish that we can get to all these questions. So just send the questions to us and let's continue this conversation, because this really needs to move forward.
I'm glad that you offered that up, because I might have offered it for you to say, you know, Philip, I think you can probably save the questions that have come in, and we can get them to you and maybe kind of put them all together
in a digest
package that we'll get back to everybody. This session was also recorded too, so we'll put some editing touches to it and share it back out with everyone, and hope to do more of these certainly in the future. Maybe in person, if you can believe it. We could get back to those events. So with that, thank you to both of you. Thank you, Philip. Thank you to the rest of the board and everybody for joining today. Thank you. You know what it means to show up and to be thinking about these things that can really make a difference culturally. So enjoy the rest of the day, enjoy your weekend, and good luck to everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining. Cheers.